Oh, so Google it. The power of the internet. Oh. Well, this is the culmination of life issues. So last week I showed you in detail how we can prove certain things that were facts in life issues. And as I'll just remind you, this class is not opinion-based class. We will talk ethics and we'll see how that works, but we won't make any conclusions in ethics. I'll just lay it out for you and let you see. But the point is, it's not opinions we're trying to gather. We're trying to gather what can we prove. And the reason we want to do that is twofold, basically. Number one, isn't it great to know the tools to know truth? I mean, did anybody ever tell you that there are 3 tools to know truth, and you can know truth through those tools? And this is absolute fact. This is the way that everyone prior to the 20th century evaluated the world. And so you are now evaluating the world the way Martin Luther did, the way that the founding fathers did, the way everyone did. And we were just talking before class about how lawyers in this trial, the Casey trial or whatever, are using historical legal method and other logical constructs or paradigms to prove the points. The second reason for this class is so that you'll have the tools to basically discuss these subjects with those that would otherwise never talk to you about these kind of issues, especially about the issues that you're really interested in, right? Bringing people to Christ. If you can't talk to them, if you can't communicate on some level, you're never going to be able to get the message of Christ to them. And so, isn't it great to be able to promote that message? This is what the original church did, because they were talking to Greeks, right? Very logic-based, and they were using some pretty interesting ways to infiltrate the Greek thought and Greek ideas. Same thing's true today. So we've got to be what? Wise as serpents and innocent as doves, right? So that we can promote the message, and that's the point. So, what we proved. Let's go. See, I've got it written down here. I just have to get to my notes.
Hey, Lionel, El Shaddai means God Almighty.
God Almighty. Well, and it's more than that.
It means a lot of things.
It means a lot of things.
We looked it up on a big screen.
You looked up on the big screen?
Yeah, I probably find bigger too.
What does it mean exactly? Did anybody find?
There's a lot of debate about what it means
It points to
exactly.
the power of God himself. Seems to be direct.
Read that section.
Well, it's good stuff. I remember looking it up. And it is, I'm not sure if it's biblical or not, in terms of exactly a quote, but
They gave all kinds of scripture.
Yeah, it says that the name Shaddai may have originated in Akkadian, meaning mountain, but to a Hebrew audience that hears God, introduces himself as El Shaddai, it must have meant both destroyer, self-sufficient one, and source of food for babies.
of course El means God. Elohim means gods. And there's El Shaddai, it's a lot of L. What's the other L? Bunch of L's. Anyway. All right. So what did we prove in life issues? So last week what we did is we looked at each of the paradigms, each of the constructs, and we said, what can we prove? So, number one, do you remember what we proved? When does life begin, according to science? With cellular respiration, which is at conception. And by the way, isn't it interesting that it's also legal in this country? According to Roe v. Wade, if you go look at the law. Are you giving me a signal?
No.
Oh, that was interesting. Anyway, you don't have Tourette's or something, have you?
Wow, you're in trouble.
Well, she hit her watch, and usually that means, that
Time's
up. Your time is up.
I think she's saying move on.
Oh. And she said move. I don't think so. I don't pre-do these, but that's all right.
Colonel, your time in the hot tub is limited.
I may be in real trouble. But we saw that Roe v. Wade basically supports the same idea that life begins at conception. And so if you want to fill this out, you say okay, life, conception, and and remember, okay, this is a hot button. If you say life begins at conception. So when does life begin? At cellular respiration, which is not a hotbed, because it's true. Life is at cellular respiration, period, dot. So that's when life begins. And that is supported legally. We'll talk about culture and history in a second. Number two, the second question is, when is death? What is death?
Lack of.
The absence of cellular respiration.
Yeah, cellular respiration. It's cellular respiration. So the absence of cellular respiration, which is basically, 3 days, 48 hours, and then you're totally, completely dead. But we also found that what does legal do about that?
The absence of brain waves.
Well, who knows? Your organs, someday maybe they'll harvest your brain. And so even your brain waves will still be moving and you're legally dead. I don't worry too much about it, but maybe someone should, because in our society you don't have to be dead to be dead. Not much dead. And,
Dead enough.
kind of interesting. Yeah, dead enough. Are you dead enough? You dead enough? What's human? What's human?
DNA.
Yeah, DNA. And basically we said 23, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm trying to find my most proper notes where I've got this exactly put in. But anyway, so what does legal say about what is human?
Stop a second.
Okay.
There are 46 chromosomes, 23 from the male.
23 pairs.
23 pairs.
23 pairs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have duplicative chromosomes. Your chromosomes are duplicative. So you have 2 pairs. And it just happens that if you have XY, then you're male. Ooh. And if you're XX, you're female. And by the way, I love to point this out. XX. So if I want to make a female,
Just ask why.
I add a rib. And by the way,
That's why men are broken.
men are broken chromosomes. This is absolutely true. Fact in science. But even more than that, what was the last created in creation?
Female.
The last created in creation. Who was the last created in creation, ladies?
Female.
Eve. Okay. Did God create those things that are more perfect first or more perfect last?
Well, of course not.
So, they-
So therefore, what is the most perfect creation of God?
the female.
The XX.
20.
Now, what does
Except
the
there
New
must have
Testament
been- There must have been some.
mistake?
Some, no, I'm trying to think what that extra leg that made it an X also created the opportunity for them to challenge authorities from the very beginning.
Uh-oh. I'm not going to get into that. That's ethics. But let's think about this for a second. By the way, if you go back and look at the New Testament, if you know the abiding view of the Orthodox Church or the Orthodox Jews at that time, the view was that women were the perfection of creation. And by the way, the Jews today, women can do certain blessings that men can't do. The blessing of the light, you ever heard that? Only women can do that. Because, by the way, the Jews don't believe that Eve sinned in creation. Women are considered the peak and creation and the peak and perfection of creation according to Jewish thought, especially in the time of Christ. Go back and reread the New Testament. It's best to read it in Greek, but if you go back and reread it in the sense of Jewish thought, especially this thought, and go read some of those passages that might bother you a little bit, ladies, and see what it really says. By the way, remember Paul said that women wear headgear in the churches because they're crowned. Who do you crown? Queens.
Royalty.
Royalty. Yes. Okay, just something I want to point out to you. I think that's really interesting what you can get from science. A little science is really good for us, right? In any case, the human 23 DNA pairs, that's right, 46 total, So what legally is human though? What's legally human?
Can you
It's up for
adopt your
grabs.
dog?
Hmm?
It's whatever you wanna make it.
Well, legally it's whatever you want to make it, but right now in our country, what is human? You know, one time black people were not considered fully human, right? And
Someone who qualifies on the science level and has already been born.
you got to, in this country, you got to be born. But even if you're born, Terry Schiavo, a speaking, breathing, living, walking around human being, was declared to be a non-human and therefore not eligible for human rights. The biggest civil rights issue is who is human. I want you to see this. It always boils down in legal terms into what is human. The Greeks, remember, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, you brought up Terry Schiavo several times.
Yeah, it's a great example in the modern world.
Well, she was only living artificially. She would not live on her own. So if we're saying that life can be sustained unnaturally, then are they living or not?
Now that's a great question. What did she require to live? What did they have to do?
Technology.
She had to have a feeding tube. She had to be fed. By the way, she could take things orally, right?
No.
She could take, but she couldn't take enough nutrient orally.
Yeah.
Now, Tammy's dad was Parkinson's, and he couldn't take anything orally because he would aspirate it. Was he human?
Yeah.
Of course it was.
Of course he was human.
No. If you are not, if the law does not protect you, you are no longer human. That's the point, guys. If what we determine legally as human, if you are determined to be human, therefore in this country you get what kind of rights?
So,
You have civil rights. You have rights. If you are not human, you're not covered under the Constitution. The only way that legally, in this country and in most countries, you can no longer be considered legally having those rights is you are no longer considered human.
in this instance of my father, if there were a family member that decided, it's costing our family too much money for his feeding tube, therefore we're going to pull it and took us to court, like they did Terry Schiavo's, then he could have been declared non-human. And he could have been made to die.
And is the terminology non-human?
Well, I'm trying.
I'm just asking.
I'm using. Okay, there is a purpose in the language we're using, because we like to cloud things in euphemism. The reason I teach a lot about euphemism in my classes is because, you know, Greek's not a very euphemistic language. Hebrew is. English is a very euphemistic language. We like to talk about people passing away or people falling asleep, but they died. So why do we want to change the words? Oh, it's a fetus. It's an embryo. Right? It's just a cellular mass.
It's a choice.
It's a choice. I'm just saying, once, okay, I'm using intentional language that has some hot button stuff. Because I don't want you to be mistaken about this. The only way that I can kill someone who is legally alive, is if I make them not have rights. If they don't have rights, they are no longer a human in your legal or history or culture. Because remember the Greeks. The Greeks, if you couldn't speak Greek, you were not a human. You were a barbarian. You were not eligible for the same rights. And therefore they made you a what? What did the Greeks make people all the time? Slaves. Remember this, until 1830s, every culture in the world was a slave-based culture. Only in the West did slavery become illegal, because what did we then confer upon those who had been slaves?
Human
The
status.
right to be a human and be conferred rights. That's what we talk about when we talk about civil rights. Women have been viewed in cultures as not having the same rights as men. They have been considered less than human.
Except for the Jews.
Well, the Jews had an issue with that too. Probably the ancient Egyptians were the best. The Jews did confer some rights on women, but not full rights. Probably Western culture is the only culture that has ever conferred full rights upon women. No other culture has ever done it.
Still working on it.
I disagree. Women have all the rights, matter of fact, they have some rights above men today.
So with women not being pastors, say in churches, where does that put?
Now you're going into a Old Testament, New Testament issue. You know, well, okay, I'll explore that just for a second, okay? Just for a second. We already established quite rightly in science that men are XY chromosomes, women are XX chromosomes. So what do you expect from women?
Children.
No, perfection. Perfection. It takes two to tango, guys, okay? I'll talk about that next week. But if women are perfection and men are broken, which by the way is biblical, very biblical, then what do men need?
A woman, that's what God told in Scripture. I didn't want you to be alone, so I'm giving you a woman.
That's right, a helpmate, right? And by the way, in Hebrew, that's a really interesting term. The Greeks had the same way. The Greeks had a very strong term, skulios, for a woman, as being not just a vessel, but being a vessel of, for example, making babies, children, but also being a helpmate, a helper in the thing. So the big deal is this: if you got something that's perfect and you got something that's needs help, which one do you want to give responsibility to make them better?
The one that's not perfect.
Now, I'm going to tell you this, I really like the way the Salvation Army does it. In the Salvation Army, you have pastors and pastoresses. You have deacons and deaconesses. They're married. So a pastor's wife is a deaconess. In the Orthodox Church, the wife of a priest is a metuska. And the metuska takes care of the women in the Orthodox ecclesia, the church. In the New Testament, we see the word deaconess. By the way, and I'm segueing, but that's okay, I'll take 1-2 minutes on this. In the New Testament, in Greek, I do not call a woman who is a fisherman a fishermaness. I call her a woman who is a fisherman. If a woman is the wife of a fisherman, I call her a fishermaness. Therefore, what is a deaconess in Greek? The wife of a deacon. What would be a bishopess? The wife of a bishop. And the early church, you know, in the early church, you got naked to be baptized. The Orthodox Church still does that. Usually for adults, they do give them robes, but they baptize you naked, and they fully immerse. Who did that for the early church?
John.
No, ma'am, not for the women. Who baptized the women in the early church? There's some evidence that the early church, the women did the baptisms, you know, observed. Remember, it's mikvah. They observed the baptisms because it would have been illegal and it would have been unethical for men to observe baptisms of naked women. So who did it? The deaconesses, the pastoresses, the priestesses, whatever, however you want to say it, you know, in the early church. So the answer to the question is, for some reason, God, and you know, this is assertive and not provable, but assertive. In the New Testament, the Old Testament, God gave certain responsibilities to men because they're broken. And likewise, he gave responsibilities to women because men are broken. And men need extra help. Now, the church wants to play a different song. They can sing all the songs they want, but that's just a point. Okay? And probably didn't make everybody happy with that, but that's all right.
I don't think he answered the question.
That's why I tell my daughters, I think it's a good, you know, these are unprovable assertions, all right? So I can't prove these. I've just, you know, and I'll talk about this in a second when we get there anyway. Okay, so, human is what legally you make human. So if you're not human in our culture, okay? Matter of fact, one of the big keys in that is, for example, Terry Schiavo is a great example, because in Terry Schiavo's case, they allowed her to die, right? They took away sustenance from her. So, you know, whether you agree with the rulings of the courts or whether you agree with other things, basically, legally, we made sure that she was not a human and therefore not eligible for rights like a normal human would be. right? And then, you know, you also get the question, I think it's a great question, you know, when, usually, we would say that we allow you to continue to live as long as your body can continue to live. That's a reasonable thing, right? So that if I have to give you respiratory, but remember, there were thousands of children, maybe millions of children, that had been injured by polio. And what did we put them on? The iron lung, respirators, to keep them alive. Because we still saw that they had worth. And some of those children recovered, some didn't, you know. But again, it's what value you have placed on human life, or what you determine is human life legally. Because remember, in the legal paradigm or construct, what can be legal? Anything can be legal.
Well, in the same regard, we are affording animals human rights and men rights.
Does that bother anybody? It bothers me.
Me too.
Because I eat animals. I eat them. I like to eat them.
Animals eat each other.
And animals do happen to eat each other. It's pretty sad, isn't it? My dog used to go after protected species all the time. And, but that's legal. It's legal for an animal to eat a species that's protected. But if you kill it, then you could actually go to jail. Be fine. But that's another issue, I guess. So, the defining issue in this country, let me see, we'll get to that in a second. All right. Let's talk about history. When does life begin in history? We talked about this. History, we said that, you know, it's based on culture, right? So history is based on culture. A lot of cultures don't even have an idea of conception, etc. You know, life for them is a perception of conception. Should I even talk about that? Yeah, maybe really quickly. It's very interesting that cultures that are not, as cultures become less survival dependent, do they kill their babies more often or less often? The more, for example, when a culture is more survival based, in other words, less food per person, do they tend to kill their children more often, or when they become more fat, more food per person, do they kill their babies more often?
The latter, or
Yeah.
When it's very interesting that in history you find that cultures that are more starvation-based cultures will protect their children much more. As the culture begins to become less starvation-based, for example, in the Greeks and the Romans, as they got more calories per person, they began killing off their children more. The same thing's true in the 20th century, because we see that in, for example, China and India. But in the Greek culture at the time of Christ, it was not uncommon in both Greek and Roman culture to leave children to die.
Would that be because there was less infant mortality, that more children survived?
That is absolutely a beautiful observation, that because of less infant mortality, therefore life itself of the infant. But yet the infant mortality was pretty high even then. You know, the percentage of children that lived to 1 year was basically pretty low, even in those cultures. But yes, that's a beautiful observation, that as infant mortality decreases, you know, the life of the infant becomes less worth something. But again, that goes back to science tells us one thing, but law tells us another. And by the way, this is culturally based, because in those times, law wasn't the issue, right? So historically, we see this connection between history and culture. Also, we already talked about it, but culturally, in the past, a lot of groups have been considered less worthy of life, right? In China right now, women are considered less worthy of life. That's, you know, they abort girls almost 2 to 1. Same thing true in India, even though there's a law against it in India, tend to abort girls more often. So therefore, girls are considered less human. Not human, less human. If you allow them to die, they're not human. If you allow, you know, if you have no rights, you're not human. In any case, let's see. Also, this determines who gets care. Who do you not care for? Those that are legally considered no less than human. For example, there's actually a lot of cases where aborted children, are left to die in abortion clinics. To me, that's first-degree murder, but apparently it's not even second degree in some states. Even some states have tried to pass laws that say you can't even give aid to. In Chicago, Illinois, they try to actually make a law that says you can't give aid to an aborted baby. Oh, and also I want to point this out. Remember we talked about last week, and it's very important within culture. Remember I showed you, I proved to you how words can't hurt you compared to sticks and stones? Why do we have, what makes it what is it that drives the idea, for example, that there might be more harm in words than in sticks and stones? What is that driving? What is the idea? Where does the idea come from that drives that?
Psychology.
It's not science. It's not science, it's culture. That's exactly right. Remember I told you early on that you have to be very cautious about what you believe culturally? Because what you believe culturally will determine how you react to certain things. We know this is true, right? Because what I want you to do is not to ignore your cultural antecedents. What I want you to do is to logically evaluate them. And if you find that they're still accurate and they're okay, that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But I want you to see whether they fit. Whether they fit in science, or legal, or history, or Old Testament, New Testament, or harm. Right? Because if you find that your cultural ideas are wrong, what therefore are you living? You're living a lie. You see? You see this? I'm not asking you to change your opinion on anything. I'm simply asking you to evaluate your opinions. Yeah?
So as we move from a starvation society to a non-starvation society, convenience becomes of greater importance. And I think that's why abortions and things like that, because they're cutting into our convenience.
That's a possibility, an interesting thought, but you know what that is? It's an unprovable assertion. But it might be provable if we did a paper on it. Unfortunately, it's a dissertation level thing. But I don't disagree. For example, 40,000 people die on freeways in this country. How many people die in aircraft accidents? Maybe 400? People are more afraid to fly than they are to drive. Well, what's with that, Oliver? I mean, I'd rather be in an airplane because it's safer. You have a 1 in a million chance of dying driving 300 miles. You have to drive 1 million. You have to fly 1 million miles to get a 1 in a million chance of dying. It's a whole lifetime, guys. So, do you see this? Culturally, we believe something. But our belief's wrong. And I've sat beside people that are absolutely in death fear of flying. When I've flown in commercial airlines. What are you afraid of? You get in a car, 40,000 people. You see? Convenience, I think that's really good. Convenience has overcome our even fear of not abstract, but absolute chance of death. Because in Wichita, we know somebody dies almost every day from a car accident.
But Lionel, the issue, I think, is bigger than that with flying, in that you don't have it in control.
That's right.
When you fly, when you drive, yes, you have a greater statistical chance, but you feel you're in control. Even though the person in front of you may have caused the accident, you have some control.
Well, even if you cause the accident, you feel like you're in control. But again, okay, right? I don't have any problem with that. I'm just telling you that the logic behind it is what? Flawed. See, really, I do care. I would like everyone